If you are currently leveling up your Django skills with this tutorial, just to let you know, this tutorial is part of a free YouTube playlist, Django Database Structural Testing, where we learn how to set up and utilize PyTest for database structural testing within Django projects. If you like this tutorial and playlist, then also check out our Django Database ORM Mastery course on Udemy. The link to the course and playlist should be found in the video description. Before we start building our first test, just a quick reminder of what it is that we're trying to achieve. We're trying to build tests to ensure that the models, our Django models, conform to the expectations of our design. Now, we have already created our Django models, but we could have followed a test-first approach, where we first of all design our tables, and then we go ahead and build our tests, and then we go ahead and actually then build our Django models. So we could have followed this approach. We didn't. We built our models first, so we already have our models in place. So we're now going to go ahead and develop our test to, like I said, ensure that our models conform with the expectations of our design. So let's build our first test. Our first test is going to confirm the presence of the table. Check to make sure the table actually exists. The first step, let's make sure that we have our testing structure in place. So we have a folder here called tests. I have a new folder called inventory. I have removed the previous tests we created in the previous tutorial, so there shouldn't be any other tests in the tests folder. So we have a new folder here called inventory. Inside of that folder, we have a new folder called model. Inside of that folder, we have structural folder. And I've created a new file called test_category. So remember, we need to follow the file naming convention so that PyTest can find this file and run the test that's inside of this file. We can then copy the contents from our docs testing, structural testing py.file. We can copy this into the test category file we have just created. That will provide us a good framework for us to work from. And now we can go ahead and build our first test. This test is going to check to make sure that we can import the table that we're currently working with, which is going to be the category table. For this test, I am going to ask you just to go with the flow for now. The purpose here is to introduce a little bit more about testing, PyTest, and we're going to introduce a new package. Let's first of all make sure that we have created and named our test function correctly. So it should start with the word test. And then this is going to be a model test, and it's going to be a structure test. Notice how I'm trying to make this descriptive. I'm not worried about how long this is, this name. I want to make it descriptive to make it easy for me and others to find and understand what this test is trying to test. So it's a model test, a structure test. It's testing for table existence, or whether the table exists. Right, so first of all, let's use a try except block, which isn't necessarily always going to be best practice. There are some instances where try except block would be useful in a test, but typically we want to utilize test features provided by PyTest in order to run our test. And there are multiple ways for us to set up this test as well. This is just an example. So from inventory.models. So we're going to try and import from inventory models our category table. Now this is very Django related, from inventory models. Now remember, we're here. So in terms of, I say we're here, we are in the test category file. Notice that's in the test folder, etc., etc. So we're trying to import from inventory models. Now, if this was a Django environment, that would be possible. Of course, in our root app, we have settings and we have the inventory registered. So Django is typically able to find the inventory app. And then, of course, we have the models module inside of our app. And we can then go ahead and import from import category. So in our Django environment, this would be possible. But however, we're working here in PyTest, and it doesn't know anything about Django. So in actual fact, we cannot perform this import as it currently stands. So we are going to potentially need a package in order for us to actually perform those kind of Django related imports. Throughout our testing phases, we're going to be utilizing PyTest Django, which is going to provide us an integration between PyTest and Django. Just think of it as a PyTest add-on, which is going to enhance PyTest, allowing us to integrate or interface with our Django application. Go ahead and pip install PyTest Django. I think I've already have that installed. Pip freeze, so make sure that you update the requirements text. And now we need to move into the PyTest INI file and just define our Django settings. So Django settings module equals, and just define where we will find that. So that's going to be e-commerce.settings. So once we have that in place, we can now run imports similar to what we are trying to perform here from inventory.models import category. Now, what you might also find is this line will be removed or changed to the word pass because the category isn't necessarily going to be utilized here. So if you are using certain linting tools, that might be the case. So what you might need to do is just comment that with no QA and F401. And that's going to be very specific for if you're using the rough linting tool. Okay, so that just prevents any changes happening there in our code. So we can run an accept here. Let's go ahead and run an import error. So if it isn't imported correctly, we can then go ahead and assert false. If you're new to testing, you won't know that assert is a fundamental statement used to validate conditions within our tests. It's used to verify whether a given condition is true or false. So if we assert and the result is false, then the test will fail. If we assert and the result of that assert is true, the test pass. So in this case, if we cannot import, then we return the import error and assert false. The test fails. So let's just finish this off with else, and we'll go ahead and assert true. So if we are able to import category, we're going to assert true. So the test will pass. If you take a look in the models, we do of course have a category table. So let's go ahead and just run PyTest, and we have no name e-commerce because I've incorrectly named that in my INI file. So e-commerce, I've forgotten the C, sorry, at the end here. Okay, so I named that correctly. Let's go ahead and run our tests again. And there we go, we have one test that has passed. Now, this test doesn't necessarily work as intended in terms of if the category table doesn't exist. Remember, this was just an introduction to some of the concepts and features that we're going to be utilizing in our testing stages. So let me just show you one of the errors. So if we were to just comment out the category table in our models, obviously now that doesn't exist, you would think that the exception would run, but that's not going to be the case. When we import models, Django utilizes an automatic validation or performs automatic validation and checks on our models. And the problem we've got here is that we look further down, for example, in product, it is reliant. There is a foreign key over to the category table. Of course, that doesn't exist. It does tell us here that there is an error with the red underline. So what happens is when we try and run the imports, Django runs automatic validation and checks on the models, finds that error, and then returns the error. And that makes it then complicated in testing scenarios to properly check for those or capture those errors using the standard try except blocks that we're trying to utilize here in our function. Let's take a look at what is returned when we run our test when the category table isn't or doesn't exist. You can see it does return a name error. You would think that we just would be able to capture that name error, but that won't be possible at this point. Now, to resolve this problem is a little bit more complicated than what I want to show at this point. I would like to continue just feeding in some more features and functionality of PyTest And then maybe at a later point in the course, we can return back to this problem and fix it once we have that underpinning knowledge of the other features and functionality of PyTest and Django.